Hello everyone. Welcome to another session on Drishti IAS platform. Today the discussion is about the Mains 2021. The geography optional question paper. If we see it, the kind of questions that have been asked. So the questions are doable. The question papers that this year was luckily on an easier side. I won't say it was very easy. At the same time, we shouldn't say that it's very tough. It was within the range, although some questions did check the deep thought process. It did demand a very deep analysis. But overall, if you look at the toughness level of the questions, it is relatively lesser than last year or prior to that. So this year's question paper was well within the range of students who have done very well, who have studied well, practiced the answer writing. So let's try to understand these questions one by one. As we know, questions have been asked from geomorphology, climatology, oceanography, biogeography, and this is also the questions from section B as well, questions of geographical thoughts, some economic geography and settlements also. So I would consider this question papers relatively easy, and we should expect very good results this year from geography. So let's start. Let's try to understand this geography optional question paper, right? Paper 1, and then we'll come to the paper 2 later. So the section A, question number 1, which is a compulsory question along with question number 5. And let's try to understand what were the questions that were asked, what was the nature of the question that was asked, and try to understand some points what we are expected to write in that answer. So the first question is, describe the concept of altiplanation. Describe the concept of altiplanation. Now you see, altiplanation is associated with the periglacial activities. It's associated with the periglacial activities. And the periglacial processes, you look at the previous year question papers from UPSC, we have had few number of questions from periglacial periods. Like there was a question asked, Pingo was asked few years ago. Then there was a periglacial cycle of erosion that was asked, Peltier's glacial cycle of erosion that was asked. And this year it was about altiplanation. Now the alternate terms also called as cryoplanation, right? There's alternate term cryoplanation. The process of altiplanation is more or less same. If I say philosophically conceptually the same as that of planation, just because of the difference of the processes involved here, the altiplanation term is associated. For example, in this case, so first aspect we need to understand that it is associated with the periglacial processes, which involve two important aspects of erosion. One is freeze and thaw action. We know that freeze occurs during the night time when the temperature decreases below freezing point. As temperature goes below freezing point, the moisture or water that is present, it freezes. And during the daytime, thawing happens. During the daytime, the thawing process undergoes. Now, this continuous freeze and thaw action results in the breakdown of rocks, result in breakdown of the surface, and ultimately the higher regions or summital convexity gets reduced by the process of freeze and thaw action. Also, there is a process of nivation that happens along with the ground, right? The process of nivation is also involved in the periglacial processes. It's like when the water particles are present in the rock pores, it freezes and there's an expansion of water because the temperature decreases below freezing point, or temperature is less than 4 degrees Celsius and further it decreases less than 0 degrees Celsius. So as temperature decreases below freezing point, there's an expansion in the water, and that results in a very different pattern of the ground, which is also called as pattern ground surface, and ultimately leads to the process of degradation, right? And that degradation process has been termed as, or reduction, results in the process of reduction of relief, or in simple terms that's called as planation. The relief is released, the process is called as planation, and that planation process was called as altiplanation by Eckin. He terms this as altiplanation. So in this process, in this particular answer, you are supposed to write the basic idea about periglacial process, the erosional freeze and thaw action, the process of nivation, and all these processes leads to the reduction of relief. And what is reduction of relief? It's a process of planation, right? The similar is called as peniplanation or other process in other terms, but since here the process is entirely different, so we have a different term for it called as altiplanation. And this is the third time in last, I think, 4 or 5 years where the question on periglacial process has been asked, right? So repeatedly question is being asked on the periglacial process or something related to the same aspect, right? So define the process and then explain the planation. What is the process of erosion? So this is the first question. So I will consider it as a decent, the level of toughness is moderate, nothing very tough, because since the Pingo was asked, although till Pingo wasn't asked in exam or those processes weren't asked in exam, we didn't pay much attention to the periglacial process. But now because it has already been asked, so I think periglacial process, any aspirant who is taking mains would have prepared for this process. So moderate level, nothing very difficult. Then let's see the second question. What is important factors responsible for the air mass modification? Again, an relatively easy question. And this year climatology was quite easy. It wasn't very difficult. So the question is asked, what are the main factors responsible for air mass modification? So how do we define an air mass? An air mass is defined as the first point, little bit about definition of an air mass. That is a zone of atmosphere where all physical properties remain the same. All physical properties remain the same. And we understand physical properties that include largely temperature, humidity, right? So if the temperature is different, humidity capacity is different, relative humidity, etc. is also different. So we understand that temperature is that primary factor that determines the characteristics of an air mass. So when we look at the air masses or consider it as a zone of atmosphere where all the properties remain the same, we know that air masses are responsible for bringing weather changes because air masses undergo some modifications. Air masses undergo modifications. Now in this particular question, the demand is what are the factors that lead to the modification in an air mass? So factors there are largely two types of modifications. Number one modification is the thermodynamic modification. Thermodynamic modification. And thermodynamic modification is dependent upon temperature, right? Temperature difference between the air mass and the surface over which the air mass is moving. So we can write straight away, there are two ways to write this answer. First, we can straight away put the factors affecting the modification of air mass. First we write temperature, then we write atmospheric condition, and so on. But because the modification word has been used, so we'll write about air mass modifications. There is a thermodynamic modification in an air mass. And that thermodynamic modification in an air mass can be brought by the temperature difference. How much is the temperature difference? Right? Just we'll go a little one step further and try to elaborate on this point. Just a little more elaboration is required here. So in the next point, in the next aspect here, we can also write that the thermodynamic modification, if the surface temperature, is less than, if it's less than air mass, right? What happens if it is air mass gets colder and subsides, and subsiding air masses can bring stable conditions. And if the condition is opposite, that is the surface has a higher temperature than the air mass is heated from below, it becomes lighter, the lighter air masses rise up and become unstable air masses. Exactly opposite conditions can lead to unstable conditions. Just in one line, do not have to explain the entire process. So temperature difference between the air mass and surface is one of the factor that determines air mass modification. Next factor or next aspect in the thermodynamic modification itself will be the modifications that are brought amount of moisture present in an air mass. Moisture present in an air mass. And the amount of moisture present in an air mass is determined by the source of the air mass. Whether this air mass is continental air mass or the air masses maritime air masses. So generally the maritime air masses have more moisture, and they show, you can write here, it is dependent upon the source, and maritime air masses show more instability. They are inherently unstable air mass because having more moisture, more humidity can rise to the liftment of air masses. Then likewise, you can write the factors which affect air masses, right? Other factors affecting air masses. So, दूसरा modification कौन सा था? What is the second type of modification that is caused in an air mass? The second type of modification is mechanical modification, right? Mechanical modification. The mechanical modification, however, is dependent upon topography, which leads to the orographic rainfall, which causes the orographic aspect. So we'll write about topography being one of the major factors in the air mass modification. For example, the elevation of a landform, it depends or determines the modification in an air mass. Right? It's an important aspect, very important aspect. So in orographic rainfall, it's purely topographical or relief modification, which is also called as orographic or relief rainfall. Now, so modification or rainfall is dependent upon how high air mass will rise. The second aspect is also about the direction of the wind, direction and the intensity or speed of the wind. Direction and the speed of the wind. So if wind is transfers to an orographic, is a transfers to a relief feature, then the air mass can rise and can cause modifications. But if the winds are parallel, like in case of Aravalis, winds are quite parallel to Aravalis, so they are unable to cause any rainfall or any modifications. So I'm repeating, there are two ways. You can just enumerate some factors which include temperature, the humidity content, relief feature, direction and intensity of the wind. Or there are two ways. You just name the modification, whether it's a thermodynamic modification or the mechanical modification. What are the factors affecting thermodynamic modification? What are the factors that affect mechanical modifications? Right? I guess this is a better way to write this particular answer. Right? Question number C. Now this question is very contemporary and very much related to the current aspect. Discuss hazards associated with the rise of sea surface temperature. Hazards associated with the rise of sea surface temperature. Now, you would see this question in general studies. This can also be asked in general studies. And this question is like, you can say the talk of the world, climate change. And climate change is no more an intellectual discussion only. Climate change and effect of global warming and the multidimensional effect of the climate change is being discussed on every front, from political discussions to economic discussions to that dinner table discussion. So it's no more round table discussion only, right? It's a common man's discussion nowadays, effect of global warming and climate change and so on. So this question is very much expected. Rise in the sea temperature, rise in the atmospheric temperature, or something related to the increase in temperature is expected in exam. General studies as well as geography optionals. Now let's see hazards associated with the rise in the sea temperature. So we'll just write in one aspect, first aspect of rise in sea temperature, that the surface sea temperature is increasing because of the overall effect of global warming, and also due to some effects or some processes like El Nino. El Nino is also responsible for increasing the sea surface temperature in some regions, in Pacific Ocean specifically. But this question does not ask or specifically talk about the sea surface temperature rise in the Pacific Ocean. It's a general idea about hazards. So what happens? What is the first hazard? So you can write one by one. Let's try to understand this one by one. The first hazard, what will happen with the increase in the rise of sea surface temperature? The rate of evaporation increases. Right? The first is increase in the rate of evaporation. Right? And this increased rate of evaporation, right, that increases. The increase in rate of evaporation is one of the reason for increased chances or increased intensity of cyclones and other climatic hazards. So how can we write this? We can write that as oceans and atmosphere form a continuum. The increase in temperature or of sea surface temperature can increase the evaporation and therefore can increase the chances of cyclone or can increase the intensity of cyclone, which is being witnessed especially in the Caribbean regions, in the Gulf of Mexico, and also in the increased frequency of cyclones in the Indian Ocean region. So, एक line में, like in one line, you need to put this right. Give some examples also that how and why we are saying that there's an increased rate of frequency of cyclones. Second point, potential hazards. Now, with the increase in temperature, what has observed in the sea surface, especially in the Arctic region, Arctic and polar regions, subpolar regions. What we have witnessed that there is more freshwater addition in oceans. There's more freshwater added to the oceans, and with the increase in the freshwater addition, the salinity of the ocean has declined. Well, we may not, salinity of water declines, and due to which the density of water has also reduced. And this decreased intensity or density of water has slowed down North Atlantic meridional overturning circulation. The impact is more in the northern hemisphere, impact is more in the North Atlantic. The North Atlantic meridional overturning circulation have slowed down. Why? Because of addition of fresh water, salinity decreases. So those thermohaline circulations, they have slowed down over the years. Because thermohaline circulations because of temperature and salinity. So if the salinity is decreasing, the thermohaline circulation will also slow down. And due to which winters in Europe and subpolar regions can be relatively harsher or relatively more harsh. Why is so? It's because we know that Atlantic Ocean plays a very significant role in moderating the temperature in European regions. But if it slows down, there won't be any moderation. There will not be any decrease in the intensity. Intensity बढ़ता चला जाएगा, intensity will be quite high. So this is one aspect. Now, what else do we see as the changes? What we see is the deoxygenation. With the increase in temperature, there is deoxygenation of ocean waters. Deoxygenation of ocean water. The dissolved oxygen holding capacity of the ocean water has reduced. It is because of the thermal expansion of water. Due to thermal expansion of water. This is one of the outcomes. Now, the increase in temperature is also not sparing, these flora and fauna, especially corals. So you can also write the impact is not confined only to the humans. It is also affecting the faunal life or overall biotic life, biota of oceans. For example, corals. It is leading to mass coral bleaching, which has been witnessed over the years. For example, you can also quote the Clive-Wilkinson report here, just to add your credibility, that according to the Clive-Wilkinson report, the heat wave that was generated due to El Nino-like effects have been the reasons for coral bleaching. But full stop. You don't have to elaborate this because you don't have number of words are limited. You can't elaborate everything. But yes, this is quite important, right? So the mortality of organisms, mortality of species have increased because of with the increase in the this temperature. So these are some hazards. So there is a climatic hazards in waiting. There is a hazard which is associated with the oceans. Hydrological hazards can be said. Hazards related to decrease in biodiversity or affecting the flora and fauna of the region. Right? ये एक aspect. चलिए फिर एक question आता which is again a relatively easy one. Let's see. D. It says the question is, gene pool centers are good hopes for biodiversity conservation. Elucidate. The question is about gene pool centers are good hopes. But crux is here. Gene pool centers. First of all, what is a gene pool? In general terms, we use the term the sum total of all genes in a given habitat is called as gene pool. But here we are talking about gene pool centers. Gene pool centers are the native lands or native regions of present or presently used or cultivated crops across the world. The crops that we cultivate in India, the crops that we cultivate in Africa, in Egypt, in different parts of the world, every region of the world, obviously they have been dispersed. And they have got dispersed. And there is a very famous hypothesis of the dispersal of these gene pools and gene centers, that is originally which are the regions of the crops that we cultivate, whether it's a cereal crops, vegetables, or any other crop for that matter, including flora, including the fauna, including the animals. So there are 8 gene pools. 8 gene pools across the world. Vavilov, for example, P. Vavilov gave the description on these 8 gene pools. First he said there are 8 gene pools, he reduced to 6 gene pools, then he comes again to the 8 gene pools. Now these gene pools include the regions of Mesopotamian region, that is between Tigris and Euphrates, the regions of Latin America, Central America, regions of Egypt, right, the Nile Delta of Egypt, the Mediterranean region, the eastern region that includes the South Asia or Southeast Asia. Like rice has always been cultivated in the Southeast Asia and southern part of Asia, including India. These coarser grains like maize, etc., probably in the Central American regions. So, gene pools. You have to describe, rather, you should know these 8 gene pool centers of the world. Gene pool centers of the world. And then, how are they acting as the good hopes for biodiversity conservation? Now, biodiversity conservation is also, there is one of the aspect that we use in biodiversity conservation is gene banks and seed banks, which is a part of ex situ conservation of biodiversity. In ex situ conservation of biodiversity, we need to understand the original habitats of these crops or domesticated animals. Because if we understand the gene pools, it will be very useful for us to understand the conditions in which such gene pools developed, evolved, and we can create the similar gene pools, such conditions, so that gene banks or seed banks can be created. So for the preservation or the conservation of the biodiversity of these crops, it is quite essential, and domesticated animals, it is very, very essential to understand what conditions, in which conditions did they evolve. So if we can trace the gene pool centers of major crops or other domesticated animals, it's easier for us to make the conservations possible. तो कंजर्वेशन तभी पॉसिबल हो पाएगा अगर हम उनको जीन पूल सेंटर्स तक लिंक कर पाएंगे तो, right? So this is basically the point that we need to discuss here. So it is not just the gene pool centers that you need to describe, you need to go a little further high and talk about the biodiversity conservation, which is the XT2 conservation, right? Conditions are created artificially in order to support the growth. So this is one easy question, but half of it is easy. The second half is moderate because you need to think and relate to this. Okay, now comes relatively a tougher question. Question is, describe how ecosystem services of Himalayas, right? Ecosystem services of Himalayas are essential for highland, lowland sustainability in Asia. Ecosystem services of Himalayas. Toughness of the question is, level of the toughness is relatively high. ऐसा इसलिए क्योंकि like we are not ready for interrelation, like so much of interrelation here. There's some challenge. Okay, let's try to understand what can we do to answer this particular question. First of all, understand the ecosystem services of Himalayas. तो पहले हमें इस पॉइंट को तोड़ना है, पहले ये पॉइंट को समझना है कि ecosystem services of Himalayas, like what all do we understand by the ecosystem services. फिर हमें समझना है, like then we have to understand highland or lowland sustainability in Asia क्या है. What do we mean by highland and lowland sustainability in Asia? How do we ensure that? So on first part of the question, the ecosystem services of Himalayas. See, ecosystem services of any region can be divided generally that it is important, it has a public benefit, it is known for ecological diversity, it has an aesthetic value, etc., etc. But we can categorize these ecological services as social services, which involves the utility by public. So public utility, as in what are the different benefits that is given by towards the public, like as in more biodiversity, more ecosystem, diverse ecosystem will always be useful for us to have a better resource availability in a region. Then cultural services known for aesthetics, right? Aesthetic services, I mean, we call it as cultural services. Then economic aspect, economic services. Economic services are very important because this is actually when we talk about the sustainability, economic services play a very important role here. Economic services like the resource utilization, right? Resource utilization, and the resource utilization, right, through it offers means of livelihood like the timber resources, like the rich biodiversity resources. So also plays an important role. And then there is ecological services also. I guess it's easier to understand ecological services. That means that rich flora and fauna, biodiversity, like that involves the environmental conservation, environmental conservation, and involves the aspects of rich diversity or ecological balance. That's a key point. So in first aspect, in the first part of the answer, we need to write about the services, like the social services as the public benefits, cultural services, it has got a aesthetic value. The Himalayan region have got an aesthetic value. It's so many tribes are associated with the Himalayas. Apart from that, it's also useful for us for tourism and other sectors. Then economic services, that is a part of economic service, that is resource utilization, and also is a means of livelihood for huge population. Ecological services, striking the balance, right? So in one paragraph, we have to give the idea about Himalayan or other ecosystem services of Himalayas. Now, they're essential for highland and lowland regions of Asia. What do we mean by highland regions? Remember, Asia has the largest highland regions in the world. Has the maximum number of highland regions. Maximum number of highland regions. Maximum number. Now, so what is so sustainability? Why we talk about sustainability of highland regions? Because they are highly fragile ecosystems. Fragile ecosystems, highland regions. They're also very important, as we know it's a source of timber, as there is huge densely forested regions. So Himalayan regions affecting 8 regions, 8 major countries, including Nepal, Bhutan, Myanmar, Thailand, right, India. So these are countries which are directly associated, or some part of Himalayas touching the countries. So in the highland regions, because they're fragile, they're highly used for timber, as these are forested regions, right? So having, if the ecological services of Himalayas are concerned, which is the ecological services, mainly is associated with ecological balance, maintaining biodiversity. This is important, so that the fragile ecosystem does not come to an end, or it is not destroyed beyond certain limit. In the lowland regions of Asia, which is very well known for paddy cultivation, right? That's the main economic activity that is seen here. Now, the paddy cultivation requires huge amount of water, huge amount of drainage. So most of the drainage services, or most of the drainage, comes from the Himalayan regions only. So the paddy cultivation, right, the paddy cultivation that is practiced in the low-lying regions also have to have more water, requires more water. And Himalayan regions, one of the ecological services that we can add here is that it acts as a watershed for these areas and paddy cultivation. So for the sustainability, as it is also one of the goal of SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, right? So to maintain the livelihood, to maintain the sustainability, we can also write the ecosystem of Himalayas must be maintained so that the present utilization of resources will continue in order to, and also ensure the future resource utilization for the next generation. Right? This is kind of the answer that we expect, or conclusion that we expect. And SDGs, the goal number 15, Sustainable Development Goals 15, it also focuses on, you can also add this point, focuses on protection, right, protection, restoration, and development, right? And development of the terrestrial ecosystem, right? So restoration of forested land, protection of forest cover, and restoration of the terrestrial ecosystems for this. So this is how we can end that. But to some extent, it is quite difficult to connect the two lines, the sustainability in highland and lowland regions of Asia, and at the same time connecting it to the Himalayan regions. अब कंपल्सरी से निकल करके हम क्वेश्चन नंबर 2 पर आते हैं. द फर्स्ट पार्ट ऑफ द क्वेश्चन सेज the concept of plate tectonics has been derived from isostasy and continental drift theory. Elaborate, citing suitable examples. See, it's very easy to connect continental drift with the plate tectonics. अगर क्वेश्चन सिर्फ इतना होता, the question would have been the concept of plate tectonics has been derived from the continental drift, elaborate and same, then it would have become very easy and very obvious. And we would have come to the continental drift. थोड़ा सा सोचना पड़ता है. Then you will have to think how isostasy led to the development of plate tectonics. How do we connect these two different topics? Isostasy, the concept isostasy is very old, like one of the oldest concept, right, to develop. It develops with a root theory given by Newton. Then there is Airy and Pratt's concept. Then there are a lot of other theories are related to the isostasy. Now, one thing that we get out of isostasy, one plus point that we get out of isostasy is that the surface, I'm not calling it as plate or crust or anything, surface of Earth is floating. That surface layer, the top layer is floating. Surface of Earth here means the top layer, called as the continental crust, referred as continental crust, referred as oceanic crust. And because of the isostasy itself, whether we go to the root theory or Airy's concept, Pratt's concept, we know that there is a part of mountain present in the crust, or also a part of that is sinking in the surface. Now, when we talk about the global isostatic adjustment, right, if you remember the diagram of global isostatic adjustment, it says that there is an erosion here, and with the erosion there is a accumulation of sediments, and it puts so much of weight on the surface, and there is internal movement of magma, and magma tends to rise from here. There is some upliftment here because of release of weight. So release of weight, and here due to accumulation of weight, magma gets displaced. And this is how global isostatic adjustments are taking place. Now, two things that we get out of here that we can understand from indirectly, I understand from isostasy. One, that continent and oceans have some floating process, and continents are lighter, therefore have a greater extent. They extend up to like 30-35 kilometers or somewhere 50 kilometers, whereas oceans are having lesser extent. Why lesser extent? Because these are denser. So there is a higher density, so it's more compact. Continents have lesser density, so there's more expansion. ये हमें isostasy से पता चलता है. This we can understand from the isostasy, based on which we say that although the exact values are different, but continental plates have the the density of around 2.8 or something, 2.8 gram per cubic centimeter, and here oceanic plates can have 3.3 to 3.5 grams per cubic centimeter as the density. This is what we get out of isostasy. Second point, so second point is that magma is mobile or has mobility. It is, according to the global isostatic adjustments, the magma inside the crust is mobile. It moves from one region to another. There is a mobility possible in the magma. This is isostasy. It helps us to understand the surface of Earth and the mobility of magma, and the crust is floating. ये एक point हम लिखते हैं. The second point that we get, second part of the question is about continental drift. Now the continental drift, we all know the basic premises of continental drift is that Sial floats over Sima. Right? Some important names like Antonio Snyder. Right? Important names like F.B. Taylor. And the most important name that is Alfred Wegener. Alfred Wegener. Now, the theory of continental drift actually lays a foundation for plate tectonics. It lays the basis for plate tectonics. Why is it so? The reason, because this is the first hypothesis that maintains the mobility, or that maintains that Sial floats over Sima, and also associates the existence of Pangea, breakdown of Pangea, right? Breakdown of Pangea, and continents move, or they drift rather, in northwestern direction or whatever direction Wegener said, they move. That is the basis. So we'll write one thing about isostasy, that isostasy laid the foundations. It's a very important concept of geomorphology or overall geology. It lays the foundations for understanding of plate movement. Understanding of Earth's surface, lays the foundations for continental crust and oceanic crust, and also global isostatic adjustment shows there is a mobility of magma. According to the continental drift, this school of thoughts, or that hypothesis, were developed. Some of the pioneers of these were Antonio Snyder, F.B. Taylor, and Alfred Wegener. Said that Sial floats over Sima, continents are moving from one region to another, and the Pangea splitted, right? And the split of Pangea led to the formation of continental blocks, and in between then oceans were created. So, nutshell में, like, we'll write one paragraph about continental drift. We'll write one more line that the drift, continental drift, which is closer to the plate tectonics, closer than isostasy to the plate tectonics, continental drift could not mention or could not give a satisfactory explanation on energy responsible for the movement of continents. Right? We'll write about this, that continental drift was not, the forces that continental drift suggested were not adequate enough were not adequate enough to explain the movement of these massive continents, like tidal pull of moon, the gravitation of earth, the bulge at equator, or for that matter the inertia of continents. These forces are not good enough to move continents for such a long distance. So therefore, what is required? So therefore, the theory wasn't supported, theory was rejected, or theory wasn't accepted on large scale. तो हम ये लिखेंगे, I will write about this. And then the discovery of seafloor spreading, and paleomagnetism provided the basis for further investigation that led geographers to the theory of plate tectonics. Because in 1960s, the quantitative revolution was in place. You will write this point in your answers, that quantitative revolution was undergoing, and which led to the synthesis of plate tectonics, because lot of geographical information was collected and was given the shape of a theory or law building, and these processes took place, which was a scientific revolution or quantitative revolution in geography. In this pursuit, the plate tectonics, right, was developed, was synthesized. So it is the further explanation of continental drift that led us to the plate tectonics. Along with, तो हम लिखेंगे sea floor spreading and plate tectonics. We shall also write one line, that Arthur Holmes' concept of convective current model to explain mountain building helped to understand the energy responsible for the movement of these continents. And plate tectonics was little different than continental drift in large ways, like it was different than continental drift. So it was because when we talk about plates, these are lithospheric fragments. And so far as the lithospheric fragments are concerned, lithosphere includes Sial plus upper mantle. So continental drift just mentions that there was a movement of continents, right? Sial floating over Sima, but here plate tectonics says no, it is lithospheric fragments, these which are called as plates, floating over a asthenosphere. Right? This is how the theory of plate tectonics was evolved. It comes out of a modification over continental drift. Right? It comes out as a modification of continental drift. So towards the end, we can write that furthermore studies should be done so that we can understand earthquakes and volcanism and other processes in detail. Right? This is how we can mention this theory. Right? So this is about the question number 2. I hope you can understand and relate. Well, it was an easy question, not very difficult. Then the question is, give a detailed account on the bottom topography of Pacific Ocean. Bottom topography of Pacific Ocean. Again, very expected, very straightforward. we know, like we study this in oceanography, continental shelf, continental slope, rise, abyssal plains, the features that we see over the abyssal plains like trenches, like sea mounts, like guyots, like basins, like rise. So it is more based on your factual information. It's highly based on your factual information. So you can draw your map for the Pacific Ocean and draw some important places and explain it. So I don't think it's a big challenge. All that you have to draw is the map of Pacific Ocean. So you'll write that Pacific Ocean is bordered by Eurasia, right, on the western side. So जब आप Pacific Ocean draw करते हैं तो remember you just name few islands like Sumatra, Java, Bali, Borneo. This is Japanese archipelago right here, some islands. So Australia, New Zealand, right. Then along the eastern part of Pacific Ocean lies the South American continent. Right, South American continent and North America, right, that is North America. So you can draw these continents. So this is roughly Pacific Ocean. An outline map is good enough, right, for Pacific Ocean. And so on this other side, you can write first, like explain the continental shelf. Next page, continental shelf of Pacific Ocean. Now, isn't the continental shelf of Pacific Ocean very narrow? Right? This is one of the features that it has a very narrow continental shelf. Reason? Because it is surrounded by highlands like Rocky Mountains, Andes, also volcanic regions on the eastern side. So because of being tectonically active region, active sides of Pacific coast, so it is because it is tectonically active, the continental shelf is narrow. तो चूंकि वो बहुत कंटिन्यूअसली faulting होता रहता है, तो continental shelf काफी narrow है इस पूरे region का. So this is the first point that we can write in the ocean bottom topography of Pacific Ocean. There is not extensive, give the reason for that. Then we can mention the most striking feature of the Pacific Ocean are the trenches. The Pacific Ocean bed has so many trenches, although the higher number of trenches are on the western part of the Pacific Ocean. More number of trenches on the western part of Pacific Ocean. So you can name this as, for example, Aleutian Trench, Japanese Trench, Bonin Trench, Mariana Trench, Mindanao Trench. You can name these trenches. We give the reasons why there are so many trenches. Reasons for the formation of these trenches. Reasons because there's huge amount of faulting. Right? There's faulting that has happened on the western margin. Of Pacific Ocean. तो वेस्टर्न मार्जिन ऑफ पैसिफिक ओशन में बहुत सारा फॉल्टिंग है क्योंकि कंप्रेशन है, एंड बिकॉज ऑफ दैट कंप्रेशन these tectonic forces these trenches have been formed, and along the trenches the plate gets subducted and it subducts, so the fault lines that are formed on the oceanic crust are called as trenches. You need to mention that. Then the second and very important feature that we see along the western side, on the eastern side also there is those trenches which are called as like Aleutian Trench, Atacama Trench. तो आप एक दो trenches का नाम और दे सकते हैं. फिर आप then you can mention about second aspect, that is ridges or rises. So we don't find many ridges in Pacific Ocean, unlike Atlantic Ocean, of course, because we do not have lot of faulting in the region, or it is not spreading. There is less sea floor spreading. So because the number of divergent plate boundaries are lesser in Pacific Ocean, because if you see the largely the Pacific Ocean region, it's a convergent plate boundaries. It's a convergent plate boundaries. So do not have lot of ridges, or for that matter divergence. One of the ridge that we see here is the Cocos Ridge and the Albatross Plateau here in the ridges, which is formed because of the divergence of the Nazca Plate. So here Cocos Ridge, part of Albatross Plateau, which gets divided because of Galapagos Island and so on. Then next feature that you will mention is the volcanic islands. Volcanic islands. So I guess it's an easy question to write. It's a straightforward question, so nothing much that I can discuss here. But towards end, you must write about one point, and that is the Pacific region is tectonically active, so therefore is prone to lot of earthquakes, lot of volcanic eruption. So number of disasters are many. Like there are a lot of disasters associated with the earthquakes and volcanism, geological disasters. So that could be the conclusion here, because it's tectonically very active. So there are a lot of geological disasters. So steps should be taken and adequate measures should be taken and so on. ऐसा कुछ हम conclusion में लिखेंगे. Okay, let's move on to the next. Well, soil erosion and degradation are a threat to the food supply. इसमें I don't have to describe much. I guess you can understand soil erosion and soil degradation. It's a very general question. So मैं इसको बहुत easy और general term में लिखूंगा, तो nothing much that I can describe here. All that you need to discuss is define soil erosion properly, differentiate it with the soil degradation, and also mention that how is it threatening to the food supply. Right? It is very important, because soil health, degradation of soil health is dangerous. And it's quite dangerous. And this can result in degradation of soil, can result in decline in the productivity of crops that we are seeing in a lot of parts of the world, including India. The soil efficiency have declined. And why is it threatening the food production, food supply? Because if the productivity decreases, overall food production also decreases. And going by the demand of the food or need of the food, right? We would require a huge amount of food. It is expected that 3 billion tons of food is required by 2050. And the pressure again is on soils to produce more food. So in this part of the question, while writing answers, first be very clear with the soil erosion. That is removal of top layer of the soil more than the natural limit. Every region there is a natural limit of soil erosion. And if the soil erosion is beyond its natural limit, If the removal of soil is more than the natural limit, it's referred as a soil erosion. Degradation, due to industrial effluents, plastic pollution, and dumping of lot of chemicals and other aspects like ecological degradation, or agricultural practices, the soil quality has been diminishing, and this is leading to a threat for agricultural production. और हम लिखेंगे कि अगर आप graphical representation use कर पाएं, that will be very good. And because it's optional, so you can also bring in the concept of club of Rome or limits to growth here. Limits to growth का concept आप यहाँ पर introduce कर सकते हैं. You can relate, because as per the limits to growth, the food demand will increase. The soil has a finite capacity to produce food. So since soil has a finite capacity to produce food, it has reached to its maximum limit of food production. Now there's a decline. So what is happening? Because food demand is increasing and the soil productivity is declining. Right? Soil productivity. So this is the graph we can probably try. This is soil productivity. This is the demand for the food. All that we can do is we can reduce the pace at which the demand is increasing, but it still remains high. It still will be increasing. It will not become a plateau. It will keep on increasing, but the rate may be somewhat less. And with the addition of chemical fertilizers, we can increase the productivities to some extent, but after all, the soil capability will reduce because there's a limit for soil. So this is due to the chemical fertilizers, but overall productivity of soil will decline. This is food production. Right, demand for food. So limits to growth को use करिए यहाँ पर. That will be very, I mean, this is the optional paper, so you must use that. Okay. Then again, a very easy question. Question number 3. The question is, examine major influencing factors for varied pattern of precipitation on continents. Major influencing factors. So how does precipitation vary on the continents? In 2 ways. Right? Whenever this question is asked about pattern, right, varied pattern or any pattern for that matter, there are 2 dimensions. क्या dimensions होती है? Temporal. Second dimension is spatial. Isn't it? With time and with space. So there's a temporal pattern and there's a spatial pattern associated. So temporal pattern ki, like, we don't have to discuss temporal pattern here. How does precipitation change with time? How has it changed with time? So that is not specific to continent, that's specific to the climate change and earth climatic conditions. So let's remove that, not required. Spatial pattern. If we are mentioning the spatial pattern, understand there are 2 dimensions of spatial pattern so far as such questions are concerned. We move latitudinally, and then we move longitudinally. That is, we move from north to south or south to north, whatever, latitudinally, and then we can go from east to west or west to east. Conventionally, हम east to west चलते हैं, so we'll go for east to west. So, major influencing factors of varied pattern of precipitation. So, there are 2 points here. One point is about influencing factors. Second point is about varied pattern of precipitation. How does the precipitation vary with latitude? How does precipitation vary with longitude on a continent. So general note हम लिख सकते हैं दोबारा से that continentality, temperature, moisture content, relief structure, right? All these factors can be mentioned. But to be little more specific, so we can write here that precipitation, so after writing the spatial and thinking on this line, that precipitation changes or varies latitudinally, it generally decreases towards poles, right? Generally decreases towards poles. Equator receives a higher rainfall, it decreases towards poles. It is because, you can add this line, it is because, why does it decrease? It is because the humidity capacity of air decreases with temperature. Higher temperature that we see in the tropical and equatorial regions have a higher humidity capacity, right? As we keep on increasing temperature, like at a temperature of 0 degrees Celsius, an air can accommodate roughly around 400 can roughly accommodate around 4 grams of water vapors per cubic meter. If the temperature increases to around 10 degrees Celsius, it can accommodate around 9 grams of per cubic meter. Then if we increase the temperature to, like, say 30 degrees Celsius, it can increase almost like 29 grams of water. So humidity capacity increases, so therefore the quantum or the volume of water is much higher in the lower latitudes than in the higher latitudes. So it generally decreases towards poles, right? अब ये तो बहुत आसान था. This is a very simple way, right? But it is not uniform, right? It is not uniform. So we can write in low latitudes, in lower latitudes, right? On the continents, I'm using the second part, eastern margin or eastern coast of continent or eastern margin of continent receives heavy rainfall or heavy precipitation, right? It decreases towards west. Rainfall decreases towards west, right? It decreases towards west. And most importantly, on the western margin or western coast of continent, there are deserts, right? There's a desert formation. Reason? So you can write it is because of the trade winds, which either move from, northeast or southeast trade winds. So अब आप एक example दे सकते हैं. You can write the diagram, you can mention it in a diagram, and you can draw any continent, like suppose this is the earth. You can draw any continent in the tropical areas and show that the trade winds pick moisture from oceans and cause rainfall in the eastern part. As they keep on moving towards western part, it becomes drier. And western regions, winds are offshore. Eastern regions, winds are onshore. So because it is in the trade winds, northeast and southeast trade winds, these are onshore on the eastern part of the continent. These are offshore on the western part of continent. Right? ये हम लिख सकते हैं. Moreover, the presence of cold current, the presence of cold current or along the western margin or western coast of the continent decreases rainfall, because cold current leads to subsidence of air, and subsiding air cannot cause rainfall. Clear? It cannot cause rainfall. Then we'll write overall in the subtropical. तो ये low latitudes या tropical regions की बात थी. In subtropical latitudes, we'll just write one more line that in subtropical latitudes, the rainfall anyways is less. It's a drier region. The rainfall anyways is less. It is because of subtropical high pressure condition. Because of subtropical high pressure condition, air masses sink here and the conditions remain drier. This is subtropical regions. So ये low latitudes subtropical की बात है, how continental varies. Then we can go in the mid latitude regions. Mid latitude regions, since it is the westerly belts, westerly regions, right? Western margin of continents, western part of continents, higher rainfall, because the prevailing winds, that is westerlies, are offshore on the western part and they are onshore along the eastern part. The rainfall decreases towards east. So on the continents in low latitudes, rainfall decreases towards west. In the mid latitudes and subpolar latitudes, rainfall decreases towards east because of trade winds. So this is one aspect. Other factors that influences the rainfall is also continentality. Is also the continentality. With higher continentality, rainfall decreases rainfall. That's because the moisture content decreases as we keep on moving to the interior parts of the continents. So moisture decreases as we keep on moving towards the interior parts of continents. So this is a very common example, like Indian northwestern part of India can be an example. Sahara region can be an example. Interior parts of Central Asia, Europe or Central Asia can be an example. So this is how continental regions receive rainfall. Then presence of ocean currents, right? Ocean currents also play important role, like warm ocean currents, which are there along the eastern part of continents, receive relatively higher rainfall, right? Because keep on causing rainfall, and cyclones and even the storms can originate because of warm ocean currents. So they receive higher rainfall. At the same time, in northwestern part of Europe, or generally we can write northwestern part of continents, in subpolar latitudes, rainfall is higher, gives higher rainfall, which is convectional in nature because of, again, warm ocean currents. जिसमें आप यूरोप का एग्जांपल दे सकते हैं. You can quote the example of Europe, northwestern part of Europe. The North Atlantic Drift brings warm ocean currents to the western coast of Europe, increases the temperature, increases evaporation, and therefore the rainfall is higher. So this is how we can mention this particular question, we can address this particular question of varied pattern of precipitation. Factors, major factors influencing varied. So varied pattern दिखाना पहले कि why varied pattern, or we can also mention factors that like winds, prevailing winds in the trade wind belt. Eastern part has higher rainfall than western part. In the westerlies, western part has higher rainfall than the eastern part. And why? How does it happen? Then second aspect is continentality. Third aspect is ocean currents. And you quote few examples like desert formation because of cold current. Quote few examples that northwestern part of Europe, despite being in the higher latitudes, receives precipitation. Right? And also mention high pressure, atmospheric pressure. So atmospheric pressure का ये दो examples हैं. The subtropical high pressure regions, because of higher pressure, air masses subside, and subsiding, because of subsidence of air masses, high pressure develops, and subsiding air masses bring stable conditions, drier conditions. Right? This is how continentality, rather, there's a varied pattern of continents that we can address. So in this question, you have a chance to show your conceptual clarity and to show how well you can address your concepts. Right? This is very, very essential. The next part is maritime security is being neglected. Indicate major challenges and suggest solutions in context of law of sea. अब इन्होंने, like again, oceanography has been asked in the contemporary context, right? So it's related to what is happening across the world. लेकिन फिर भी ये, I mean, it's largely associated with the threats around Indian Ocean, threats around Pacific. You know about Indo-Pacific meetings, or which is the FT plus, or for that matter, Quad plus, like we are looking beyond Quad, or we are involving Pacific Ocean partners as well. So maritime security, let's understand the question. Maritime security is being neglected. तो पहले आपको ये बताना है कि maritime security, why are we saying that it is being neglected? What does this statement mean? Then the second part is indicate the major challenges, suggest solutions in context of law of sea. So यहाँ पर दो aspects है. It is also the part of obviously it's a part of oceanography, but also has some geopolitical angle to it. Maritime security, for example, the Chinese influence in South China Sea and hobnobbing of China in Indian Ocean region. Hobnobbing of China in Indian Ocean region. So there is that economic dominance plus the dominance that some countries are showing towards the few water bodies. There is also the threat of maritime terrorism. Maritime terrorism. Like for example, the incidents like Mumbai attacks, right? It was sea route that was used to enter India. Besides that, huge amount of trade. So it is not the threat on the land itself, but also to the oil tankers, to the trade, these ships and cargoes which are passing through the ocean routes. Their security is also threatened. Their security is also threatened. Law of sea, now why is it so? You can write that ships, or rather trading ships, cargoes, oil tankers, right? The securities of these are also threatened. Now, this is why maritime security is we feel that there's a wide range consensus among the world, in the world, that there is a threat that maritime security is being neglected. We are doing more for the territorial security than the maritime security, especially in the blue waters. Now, so this is just an introduction of maritime security. Up, second part of the question kya hai? Look at the second part of the question. It says, indicate the major challenges and suggest solutions in context to the law of sea. What are the major challenges in context to the law of sea? We can write one by one major challenges. So point wise इसको लिखेंगे और point wise solution या उसका suggestion भी दे सकते हैं. So you can write point wise and give the solutions accordingly. First challenge is drug trafficking. Right? Drug trafficking. So what has happened is that now the dealing or that drug trafficking doesn't take place only in the territorial waters. With the improvement of technology, drug peddlers or those drug dealers, they can easily enter into blue waters, which is beyond 12 nautical miles. According to law of sea, 12 nautical miles is the territorial zone, right? Territorial sea. Now the deal is done beyond 12 nautical miles in the blue waters. In this scenario, it does not come under the territory of that particular country. So the problem, this is one of the major challenge. So in order to that, अब हम इसी को थोड़ा like we can quote few example. Like for example, there was a Operation Martello that was conducted along the coast of Salvador, 200 nautical miles away from the Salvador coast, where these drug peddlers were caught. Now, what is to be done is the law of sea needs a further input, further steps to be taken so that to conserve to bring this high waters also in the territorial zones, not for the kind of imposing territorial laws, but at least prevention of such drug trafficking. Second threat and second very important aspect, piracy. Right? Piracy. One of the oldest threat to maritime security has been piracy. And we know the pirates of Gulf of Aden, right? Gulf of Aden, this very narrow stretch, it's almost a choking point of Indian Ocean, Gulf of Aden. Now, in this case, law of sea does provide to check the piracy. What is it? If the act of piracy is caught in the territorial waters, it is treated as the domestic crime. Right? Domestic crime. So if a pirate is caught or a ship is seized, it is considered under the domestic laws. Now, what is the challenge? This is according to the law of sea. Right? I think Article 105 or whatever it is. So you can understand that. Now, in this case, what is the need? That International Court of Justice and other aspects should also support domestic laws or provide guidelines to domestic laws to check or prosecute the pirates or the ship that has been seized. So this is also one of the international convention. This is one of the point that we must include in the under the law of sea. Next aspect is associated with, which is very threatening, is small arms and weapons of mass destruction. There is around $2 billion of trades associated with small arms and weapons of mass destruction that takes place through sea routes. And the incidents like Mumbai or incidents like 9/11, that like Mumbai attacks that was carried through the sea route, or at least they had come to the sea route. Now there is a very important aspect that we need to consider. This is one of the biggest challenge so far as the the threat security of maritime security is concerned. Another aspect is trafficking, like human trafficking. Here trafficking means we are referring to human trafficking. The law of sea also provides for to check the illegal migration, etc., and it also promotes, rather it also guarantees freedom for all in high waters or high sea. High seas are the seas which come beyond exclusive economic zones, right? Which come beyond exclusive economic zones. But at the same time, this is again a threat, right? So there are like बहुत सारे like data है which we can't use in the mains examination, all of that, and there's Human Rights Commission also which is looking in the matter, that there should be an international body which looks forward for the trafficking, human trafficking, and check the illegal migration also. So an international body is required for here. These are some problems or challenges in context to the law of sea. Besides that, now in your answer you must incorporate Indian aspect also. And you must include that, because India has already faced a brunt of maritime attack from in the case of Mumbai, or for that matter the hobnobbing that is taking place around Indian Ocean region. So India's concern also should be mentioned, especially connected to Indian Ocean region. The Indian Ocean region is transporting around 75% of merchandised good, right, trade, and also has very strong choke points like Gulf of Aden. It's a very, like what happened in Suez Canal in 2021, right? Just that narrow canal, if it is choked, the entire trade gets affected. The entire route of Indian Ocean gets affected. So this is again a very, very significant aspect that we need to deal with, right? So choke point. So India is mainly concerned because Indian Ocean region has the choke points, especially in the Strait of Malacca on the eastern side, Gulf of Aden on the western part. So वो choke points का नाम लिखेंगे हम, we'll write that. Then we'll also write, because of the trade that is passing through, it is oil-rich region, and therefore is susceptible, or it's vulnerable to the political problems. So this is threatening the peace in Indian Ocean. To which India is deeply concerned. And therefore we come up with the programs like Sagar, or idea of Sagar, right? Safety and growth for all in the region. Safety and growth for all in the region. So this is in context to Indian context. So a global context, we have to mention a global context because law of sea, convention and law of sea, Chinese influence in Indian Ocean and India's concern. So this is how you can handle this question. Okay, now another part, explaining the concept of carbon neutrality, describe measures taken by carbon positive and negative nations. Relatively easy. इसमें like we prepare environment ecology, there's an environmental geography, and in environmental geography or environment ecology, this carbon neutrality is being discussed over and again. So in this question, you have to understand or like define carbon neutrality. Simple carbon neutrality. That is, the amount of carbon emitted is absorbed by carbon sequestration, right, and storing the carbon neutral. So it is the amount of carbon emission is balanced by absorption, right? Carbon absorption by the process of carbon sequestration. Carbon sequestration, right? Absorption and storing the water. This is expected question. Since 2018 we are expecting the question on carbon neutrality, और इस बार question neutrality पर आ गया. Why? Because carbon neutrality concept was promoted by lot of environmentalists, and World Tourism and Trade Corporation, they have signed agreement to become carbon neutral. European Union signed an agreement that will, to become carbon neutral by 2050. India to become carbon neutral by 2070. So पहले हम carbon neutrality की बात करेंगे, define करेंगे, and we'll write one line about measures or ways to become carbon neutral. And simplest or easiest way to become carbon neutral is increasing green cover. By increasing green cover and changing the energy consumption pattern. The way energy consumption pattern is changed towards renewable sources of energy. So this is one of the. अब second part question का क्या था कि like describe the measures taken by the carbon positive and negative nations. So what are the measures taken? What are carbon positive and what are carbon negative nations? Positive, which emit more carbon than they are absorbing. This is the scenario of the world. Like entire world scenarios like this, we are absorbing somewhere around like 18 to 20 gigatons of carbon, and we are emitting somewhere around 30 gigatons of carbon. So this is world overall is carbon positive, right? World is carbon positive because we are emitting more carbon dioxide than what we are absorbing, or we are able to undergo sequestration for. So question is about measures taken. So like here there are two worth mentioning examples. We can take example of European Union, which is pledged to go carbon neutral by 2050. India to go carbon neutral by 2070. In order to, both these regions are focusing upon the changing of energy consumption pattern. energy consumption pattern, right? Shifting towards renewable sources of energy. Sources of energy. Like India has targeted that by 2022, India will produce 175 gigawatts of renewable energy. Renewable energy, 175 gigawatts of renewable energy. For that, the focus is on solar power plant, focus is on establishment of, establishment of wind power plants, right? Hydroelectricity and so on. This is the target. And same thing, European Union is also doing the same, increasing investment in the renewable source of energy, shifting the energy pattern, energy consumption pattern, because that is one of the easiest way, that is the way that we should be going for. और यहीं पर एक एग्जाम्पल है कार्बन नेगेटिव नेशन, and one nation that is carbon negative is Bhutan, right? Bhutan is carbon negative. And Bhutan, what steps have it taken? Afforestation and conservation of forest. The country is 70% covered with forest, like it's a forest cover is 70% of the area. And they've passed an agreement, they passed a law not to reduce forest cover by less than 60%. So the total forest cover is 70%, and as per the law that has been passed by the Parliament of Bhutan, that the forest cover will not reduce beyond 60%. Apart from that, Bhutan also produces huge amount of hydroelectric power and has ensured that this hydroelectric power generation is free for the citizens of Bhutan. India is one of the greater investors there, but then the only example of carbon negative is Bhutan. Right? So these are two steps. One, changing the energy pattern. Another has changed energy pattern and carbon neutral because they have maintained the forest wealth. They have maintained the forest there. And we know the forest increases carbon absorption. Absorbs carbon dioxide. Right? Now comes the question number 4. A straightforward question. Question is, with suitable examples, elaborate human ecological adaptations. Explain its impact on ecology, environment, and various parts of the world. It's a topic straightforward question, जो कि like it's mentioned in the environmental geography. What are human ecological adaptations? Straight question with examples. Ecological adaptations. So you can write broadly biological adaptations. Right? Biological adaptations are largely the physiological adaptations. And morphological adaptations. Physiological adaptations, the changes in the physiology of man, like four-chambered heart, pulmonary respiration, central nervous system. Morphological adaptations, change in the skeletal structures, right? Bipedal locomotion, changes in the spinal cord and skull arrangement, right? Occipital lobe and a lot of other aspects, but हमें बहुत ज़्यादा detail में नहीं जाना. We don't have to write the biological aspect in detail, just an idea that yes, there are biological adaptations from bipedal locomotion to the balancing act, and also development of central nervous system, physiological adaptations like change in the respiratory system like pulmonary respiration, apart from that also the four-chambered heart and so on. Now, there are other cultural adaptations. Cultural adaptations. Now, in cultural adaptations, it's largely the way of life. Way of life, which continues from the economic activities, right? Economic activities, which is designed, or economic activities are guided by the way resources are available, right? Somewhere we have agriculture, somewhere mining, etc., fishing, hunting, and so on. So these are some examples, some of the cultural examples that we can given, and it's very easy. But then the second part of question, how do we associate with that? Because adaptations are the changes brought within to acclimatize or get used to changing conditions, right? Changing conditions, which are largely external conditions. So there are externally induced conditions, right? And that way of life changes. Now, how do we associate with the way of life, with all this? So we'll write about the basic idea of adaptations. There are biological adaptations, there are cultural adaptations. But now comes one and very interesting aspect. How do we relate it to the impacts on ecology and environment in various parts of the world? Right? Yaad rakhiye, in the cultural adaptations or combined biological and cultural adaptations, man has the ability to change his milieu, to change his environment. Man has ability to change his environment, which is also from the French school of thought, possibilism, Vidal de la Blache. So we will write possibilistic viewpoint that man can change his surrounding, and the ability to change his surrounding is dependent upon cultural aspect, the development of the culture is dependent upon cultural aspect. So the ability to change his environment to an extent, but so the environment has changed to an extent that at places it has become almost irreversible. It has become irreversible. Like for example, ab yahan par, like now we'll write about something related to what are the changes. Like agricultural activities have led to deforestation, and also you can use activities such as shifting cultivation practiced in dense forested regions of, like say, Central Africa, like islands of Polynesia or islands of Southeast Asia, islands of regions of Mexico, and including northeastern part of India, just named differently, like Masol, Roca, right? Roca in Brazil, Conuco in Venezuela, then Tamarai and Masol, Tavi, so many other names of shifting. You don't have to give the names, just an idea that these are shifting cultivation which has impacted the forest in great ways, and agriculture overall is one of the aspect that has led to deforestation. Now, we'll add this line and connect this agriculture to next aspect, that how man has changed his milieu or his surrounding, how environmental impact. The agricultural surplus led to the industrial growth, right? Led to the industrial growth, establishment of industries, and it is industrialization that led to lot of urbanization. So the urbanization, the natural landscapes have changed into humanizing landscapes. So you will write human landscapes, which is more concrete, more urban centers, more industries, and this has changed the overall scenario as an increased emission of carbon dioxide, increased the temperature, right? Or urbanization, say, can add this line, that it's also led to the increase in temperature overall, and which is outcome, the urban heat islands are the outcome of the same. Besides that, when we talk about the changing of this impact overall, so we can write pollution levels have increased and so on, आप लिख सकते हैं इसमें, and humans, because of all these activities, are also one of the catalyst in mass extinction of species. So it has a sixth mass extinction of species. This is the impact. It is not the man who is responsible alone, but man is acting as a catalyst. All these adaptations have catalyzed the sixth mass extinction, right, of species. But towards the end, we can write this line towards a conclusion, that if man can change his milieu, man can change his surrounding, the man also has an ability to rectify all this, right? It is man has an ability to take corrective measures, right? Some corrective measures, afforestation programs, carbon sequestration, and so on. Right? So this is how impact can be observed globally. Next is stream basin drainage divides are important components to delineate a watershed area. First of all, watershed area. We need to understand what is the watershed area. Second term is stream basins and drainage divides or water divides. They are very important, very essential to delineate a watershed. So first of all, we have to understand what is the watershed, what are these stream basins, and why watershed is so important. So watershed drainage, like when we define watershed, so the first aspect should be about watershed, that it is a geohydrological unit that gives rise to many streams and tributaries. It is the rainwater and other surface water, when it drains to a single point, as a single unit. That's how watershed is defined. Now, many a times watershed and basins are, kind of overlapped, right? So, to understand this watershed, to delineate a watershed, it is very essential to understand water divide. अब दूसरा term, like next we need to understand what is a water divide, right? Water divide is a generally high regions, high elevated regions. These are elevated regions dividing many drainage systems. Right? This is how we can divide the two. Now, to delineate watershed, it's very important to delineate water divide, because only if we know what is a water divide, that is the highest elevation which can divide, which we can demarcate these watersheds. Right? So the question demands, in the question, what is very important to understand, the watershed can be drawn because it is the highest point in a basin, highest point in a drainage basin. Water will flow along the slope. So water flow takes place along the steeper slopes. So that's important, how watershed can be drawn. Now, this is why how we can mention these two terms: define watershed, define water divide, and understand the water divide divides the two regions. Now, the question is, watershed is not only a geohydrological unit. It's not only in the geographical terms, but also has a socio-economic and political connotation. How? Because political connotation, because social connotation or social aspect, because of the fact that it can, watershed program, whenever we launch a watershed program, see, if there is water, there is prosperity. The region with water is prosperous, because if there is water, agriculture can be practiced. If there's agriculture, there's prosperity, there's basic needs are fulfilled. So watershed also has a social connotation of prosperity, you can say. Economic, employment generation, political, policy making. This watershed development program that we launched in India, or for that matter any region in the world, have also helpful to prevent against drought. It's also measure against drought. Right? It's also the part of the drought management in India. So therefore, watershed is not just a geographical term, but it also has a socio-economic and political connotation. Political, policy making, economic, associated with the economic activities and employment generation, and social because of overall prosperity in the region. Okay, now indicate the cause of lightning. Second part, indicate the cause of lightning, describe the threats associated with it. It's a very general aspect. मैं इसको सिर्फ context बताऊंगा कि क्या context है, and then we'll see the cause of lightning. Context is that lightning, and that would be the threats. Lightning over the years has become the single largest reason for death caused due to hazards. Single largest reason for death caused due to hazards. Now, there's a phenomenal increase in the incidence of lightning over the years. This is the context of the question. Lightning, the cause of lightning is, of course, the charged particle. Charged particles present in clouds. Now, where do clouds get the charge from? Right? What is the source of charge in the clouds? The source of the charge is basically the evaporation only. When evaporation occurs, some charged particles like sodium and chloride ions also evaporate. Right? The sodium and chloride ions also evaporate. Okay. So when we look at the charged particles, the positive ions are relatively denser. So having a look at this cause, the positive particles are generally closer to in the lower part of the cloud, and negatively charged particles are present in the upper part of the clouds. Right? Upper part of the clouds. So due to the compression within the cloud, there is upper part and in the lower part. Due to the compression in the cloud, there's friction, and due to this friction, lightning is produced. The lightning can take place within the cloud, which is not so dangerous. The lightning can also take place towards the ground. Right? So within the cloud and towards the ground. So within the cloud, we can understand there's compression in the cloud and there's friction. Sometimes the ground particle is negatively charged. So there is a mutual attraction between the negatively charged ground surface and the positively charged particles present in the lower layer of the cloud. And this causes the transfer of energy or transfer of charge towards the ground surface. But this is one of the reasons for lightning that travels towards the ground. So this is the cause of the lightning. Now, why has the lightning increased over the years? Two reasons. Number one, the rate of evaporation has gone higher. Rate of evaporation has increased. Moreover, with the increase in temperature, air particles or air constantly moves upwards. There's an constant upward movement of air due to higher temperature, like because of average temperature of atmosphere has increased. Plus, देखो, एक point जो like sometimes we ignore, urbanization. Due to urbanization, we know that concretization takes place and there are frequent urban floods. The seepage of water is not taking place, not just urban areas, even in the rural areas this has increased. Because of the less seepage of water, right? The water remains on the surface. Water remains on the surface, and the surface becomes more conductive, or as a conductor. So conductivity of the surface has also increased. The conductivity of the surface has also increased because of presence of water here. क्यों वो पानी जो है वो percolate तो होता नहीं, water is not percolating, it is remaining on the surface itself, so it's becoming, making the surface more conductive, or conductivity has increased, and that is the reason why incidents of lightning have become so severe. The two reasons related to the climate change, rate of evaporation is increasing, so air is continuously rising, compression is taking place at a faster rate, plus urban areas, right, making it difficult for water to seep through. And discussed its threat, sometimes fire. So I guess threats is very easy to understand. It is one of the single largest reasons for the deaths across the world, including India. Like Maracaibo, Lake Maracaibo, we can take some example. There are Maracaibo in Venezuela. Maximum, it has the highest frequency of lightning in world. In Odisha, the incidence of lightnings are maximum, and the deaths caused by the lightning are also maximum in Odisha. Right? So these are that's because of frequent storms. Of Maracaibo mein, why is it so? It is because of the frequent storms that take place. Frequent storms and cyclones which originate in the region, because Atlantic Ocean is very warm. That Caribbean current circulates in the region, and that is the reason why storms are very frequent in the region, and that becomes a very dense cloud of frequent lightning. Threats though, you can manage with that. Let's come to the next section B. यहाँ पर section A खत्म होता है, physical geography. But you see, before I go to the section B, look at the nature of the question. They seem to be very general. Like अगर हम like typical geographical questions देखें तो there are 2 or 3 questions which are conceptual questions. Rest of them are somewhere related to the contemporary aspect, right, and also the process. So there is a process and the contemporary aspect to it. Lightning is a process, and there's a contemporary context in which the question has been asked. Then is section B, and section B mein the very first question that was asked is one of the most challenging question of this year. I consider this as the most challenging question. You can read the question carefully. A, part A, the interrelationship between social and spatial structures are complex. Explain in context to the socio-spatial dialectic. Agar like this question is manageable only if you understood the context of the question. Then we'll try to frame this question, try to be elaborate as much as possible. The context of the question is from Marxist geography. In geographical thoughts, it's the Marxist geography from where the question has been put up. So the interrelationship of social structure and spatial structure. Let's try to understand this. So the question demands understanding of 2 points. One is the social structure, right? Understanding on social structure. Second is the understanding on the spatial structure, right? And the interrelationship between the two. The interrelationship between the two. What do we mean by the social structure? The social structure is a patterned arrangement of social institutions. Not necessarily the norms or traditions which are followed, but the kind of institutions that have been established, like marriage, like family, like society, like some other institutions. It can be political institutions also, it can be economic institution as well. So first point we have to understand about the social structures, that is the patterned arrangement of social institutions. Right? Family, marriage, economic aspect. But what is important here, देखो मैं फ्लो चार्ट बना के दे रहा हूं ताकि आप you can write this, you can understand it. The social institutions. Now this social structure, you'll write not only involves or includes, rather not involves, includes family and religious institutions, also includes economic structure. It also includes economic structure. Where to understand this all economic structure, here we focus upon not only understanding this but also the modes of production. Thus, like here you need to understand this. Also, mode of production. This is social structure. That is, when we talk about the institution, social institution, it also includes the economic aspect, which means the mode of production. So, patterned social relationship. Right? Now, patterned social relationship or this entire social life. Right? Next aspect, that social life or the social structure, social life or social structure is actually dependent upon, has spatial arrangement and temporal arrangement. बस ये key point है. Temporal arrangement. See, social life or social structure evolves with time. The social structure that existed in India or any society in ancient times is quite different than what it is today. The mode of production is different. Norms or religious aspects may be same and it has transferred, but there is definite some changes, right? There is a slight evolution in all the social institutions that have taken place to the time which suits the time, need of the time. So we'll not discuss time because it is not sociology. We're discussing geography. So in geography is a study of space. So what is important for us to understand? Spatial aspect of social life. अब हम spatial structure में चलते हैं. Do we have the similar social arrangement everywhere in the world? Right? Cultural aspect same or way of life the same? No. It is not the same. क्यों? क्योंकि spatial structure अलग-अलग है. What do we mean by spatial structure? It is the natural conditions. It involves the natural conditions. Or it involves, right, environmental, मैं ऐसे लिखूंगा, it involves man-environment relation, which does not remain the same. Now you just elaborate a bit. For example, in the fertile plains, the social structure is quite different. As in, for example, in fertile plains, it is more like joint families. It is more like agrarian ways of life. In deserts, It's more like nomadic ways of life. So spatial structures are different. Now the question says interrelationship between social structure and spatial structure. तो ये समझिए पहले what is social structure and what is the spatial structure. What is the interrelation? With space, with geographical area, as we keep on changing the regions, there is a change in the social structure because that is the demand of the region, that is the need of that region. So man-environment relationship, which is in equilibrium, but changes the mode of production do change, right? So you can write here the mode of productions changes with space, right? ये पहला part है question का. Let's read the second part of the question. The second part of the question says explain in context to the socio-spatial dialectic. Now, what is this dialectic or socio-spatial dialectic? The dialectic aspect is associated, it means that it's the intellectual way of finding the truth through arguments, through debates, through antithesis, thesis, synthesis, right? This is how dialectic way. Now, we'll come to the human geography aspect. The task, rather, we'll write the focus of human geography or a human geographer should also be to understand these various modes of production where, or especially in the class-based divisions, it is against the positivistic viewpoint. Positivistic viewpoint. Why? Because as per the positivistic viewpoint, or the QR, as per the quantitative revolution, every region with the same structure should be at the same level of development. As per this kind of positivistic viewpoint, the regions of the same geographical condition should be at the same level of development. But is it true? In 1970s, you can write 1970s QR, positivistic viewpoint was parallelly developing with the Marxist ideology or Marxist viewpoint of geography or Marxist geography, which focused on the true point is the change. So the task of geography, the task of human geography, considering the socio-spatial dialect, is not just to understand the mode of production, but also to bring change in the mode of production. But also to bring the change in the mode of production. So he says that universal spatial law and spatial analysis that we study in geographical thoughts is a misnomer. Because we have to understand arrangements which change with different societies and also seek the changes in the given arrangement. So abhi jo social structure hai, the entire social structure that is existing, that also needs to be changed. This was basically the outcome, this interrelationship between the spatial and social structures. It's a challenging question, right? It's a challenging question, and many a times I've seen, Many times I've seen some students struggling, especially in geographical thoughts, because it has that philosophical aspect. Then, but the point is that you just have few, like 100 words to write on this. So, आपको 150 words to write on this. So, it's challenging to complete all that in this 150 words. Next, how is energy transition seen as an instrument to achieve zero carbon by 2050? So, well, we have already discussed upon this question, so I don't need to discuss this again. Energy transition, especially we are talking about the European aspect here, right? So, European condition which is pledged to become carbon neutral by 2050. So, there are largely two aspects that we need to produce more energy, more renewable sources of energy, according to Institute of Renewable Energy Agency, right? International Renewable Energy Agency. Its focuses on that we need to produce. Presently, we are producing 2,500 gigawatts of renewable energy. That needs to be increased up to 27,500 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2040. So the focus should be on solar power plants, wind energy, and so on. So changing the energy consumption pattern, one aspect. Second, increasing the sale of electric vehicles from presently 4% to 100% by 2030, right? To 100%. And for that, we need to produce 1.8 billion vehicles per year. So this is how it's a very big electrical vehicles. Apart from that, rather providing electricity to the population which doesn't have an access to electricity, so that the consumption of wood and coal would reduce, right? So this is how energy transition can take place. So consumption of energy towards renewable sources, consumption of energy that will provide electricity. Will provide electricity to those people which have not got access to the electricity, so that the dependency on coal and firewood reduces, right? So it's a easy way. Then protected cultivation assists in healthier and larger produce. Justify with example. What is protected cultivation? Covering the soil and that process is called as mulching, right? General topic hai, general aspect hai, so isme like no need to elaborate on a large scale. So आपको like possible है समझना protected soil cover कैसे होगा. So mulching is done. So mulching, what is the benefit here? How is it healthier? Because it prevents soil moisture. It also prevents soil erosion, right? And increases organic content of the soil. Increases organic content of the soil, right? Which is also a part of the zero based natural farming, which is also the part of organic farming. And protected also, we can use agronomic practices in protecting soils, right, and cultivation. तो हमें बस ये देखना है कि ऑर्गेनिक फार्मिंग इंक्रीज होगा एंड मल्चिंग इज डन सो दैट impact on the soil is less, soil is remain fertile, organic content of the soil improves, soil moisture improves, and that is how the productivity can increase better in that case. Yes, then comes another challenging. I find this as the second most challenging question. Explain the process of contagion and hierarchical diffusion in addressing the regional imbalances. Right? There is, looking at the first aspect of it, like if we look at this point and hierarchical diffusion, it looks as if the question is about diffusion of innovation, which was given by Hegerstand. Yes, to a great extent, it is an outcome of the diffusion. But what has made it's a question based on diffusion. What has made it little more challenging is how it addresses the regional imbalances. The two types of diffusions. So, contagion diffusion and hierarchical diffusion. First of all, let's talk about these 2 points and then we'll see how they address the, this regional imbalances. Now, contagion diffusion is a very faster way of diffusion. The diffusion of information, news or innovation occurs from people to people, like that, like person to person. So the diffusion takes place from a person to person. It is largely dependent upon the transmission or rather the kind of diffusion or spread of information, of culture, of norms, of practices, of laws, whatever we call it as, from person to person, and it's more like the lateral diffusion. The lateral diffusion or the horizontal diffusion. So in regions where the population density is very high, in the regions where people to people interaction is very high, in the regions where there are social interactions, the contagion diffusion is much higher. Like the diffusion of culture or cultural practices. एक को देखकर दूसरा practice करेगा, then information changes. Second aspect is hierarchical. As the name indicates, hierarchical. That is the diffusion of information, innovation, or the spread from the central authority. From a central authority. Or it is not just the central authority, also from a region of relatively higher settlement, from other places. Like from urban regions, it gets transferred, the information transfers to the rural areas, and from rural areas it goes to another rural areas. So there is a kind of central or authoritative diffusion of innovation in this case. Like government comes out with some scheme and the message spreads from, say, New Delhi to the states and from states to the districts and so on. So this is hierarchical diffusion. So on one aspect, it is the process of contagion and then contagion diffusion and hierarchical diffusions. How that addresses the regional imbalances. So the definition is not a question, not a difficult part, but how is it addressing the regional imbalance? वो important aspect है. तो regional imbalances के लिए, for the regional imbalances, what is the important aspect? How do we reduce the imbalance? We reduce the imbalance by equal distribution of resources. by uniform distribution of information. I'll just give one example and then probably we can think on the lines. कि जब, like suppose high yield variety seeds were introduced, so it were introduced from some authority like ICAR or by say National Seed Corporation, and it transfers from one region to another region, and then farmers, and then it goes to the village level, and then state seed corporation started distributing it. And later, by looking at the progress of the big farmers, small farmers also adapted. So it was kind of hierarchical diffusion from ICAR to say National Seed Corporation to state seed corporations, right? State seed corporations to farmers, like generally the big farmers of Punjab, Haryana. So later from farmers it got transferred literally to small farmers, marginal farmers, and other regions also. So there was an element of contagion diffusion, and there was an element of hierarchical diffusions too, coming from higher authority and from one region to another. Now in the same case, this diffusion is important. आप यही example quote कर सकते हैं exam में. You can quote the same example in exam, right? Like Green Revolution created an imbalance. It created inequality, right? It created inequality. But why? Because diffusion doesn't happen. But later, with the contagion diffusion or hierarchical diffusion, the imbalances could be reduced. Because the other crops were also brought in Green Revolution. This is one of the example. Apart from that, what has been observed, second example, क्योंकि ये ऐसे like you can't address this on a general front. We will see that regions with higher population density, right, have higher per capita income, right, with higher per capita income. Now, these regions with higher per capita income can transfer to the rural areas, right? Hierarchical diffusion, right? Because these are generally urban areas. There's more business, more work, and from there it goes to the rural areas. So this is again a hierarchical diffusion from one region to another regions. Or the third example that we can quote is the growth pole. If we have studied the growth pole concept, the growth pole concept initially creates polarization, right? Polarization. And this polarization is a deliberate inequality between the polarized developed pole and underdeveloped periphery, right? The polarization creates regional imbalances. As per Friedman, you can quote the example. Friedman in the center peripheral model, he says that there's a deliberate inequality between the developed core and underdeveloped periphery. But later, as the polarization happens, there is also the diffusion. उस diffusion को हम क्या कहते हैं? What do we call that diffusion as? Trickle down effect. That trickle down effect is nothing but the hierarchical diffusion. From the central point, the diffusion occurs to the peripheral areas. This is hierarchical diffusion, and that's very important to reduce the regional imbalances. We'll go one more aspect. Last example, growth pole ke saath, like along with the growth pole. Growth foci, the concept promoted by R.P. Mishra, right? Promoted by R.P. Mishra. He suggested rather than focusing on growth pole, we should focus on growth foci, establishing industries or small scale industries in rural districts and areas. In the growth foci, it's mainly about the contagion, diffusion. It spreads from one region, one person to another person to another person in the rural areas. So this is how we can, the hierarchical diffusion or an overall diffusion of information, resources and funds is important to reduce regional imbalances. Though ya teen example, depending upon the word limit, you can quote. You should mention growth pole because it's a question from regional development planning. You should mention green revolution, right? How green revolution help, how it diffuses to other regions. Right, so this is resource allocation and so on. And also you can refer to the population is higher in density is higher and per capita income is higher in urban areas. Then, well, you can't get an easy question than this. I found two questions easy. One was this, another was industrial location model. Examine the relevance of central place theory of Christoller in present context. Relevance of CPT, central place theory of Christoller in the present context. It is not only in the present context, किसी भी context में central place theory applicable है. The two principles of central place theory will be almost universal principle. What is universal principle or which is always applicable? There is a principle of centrality. Principle of centrality, which is from atom to the solar system or probably the universe, there exists the centrality. First context. Second, with the interaction, there is hierarchy. The principle of hierarchy. So, even if it was not present context, so we'll write this line that central place theory is the two basic principles of central place theory are always applicable, that is centrality and hierarchy. There is a centrality in every settlement and there is a hierarchy present in all settlements which are interacting. This is the first relevance. Second aspect, you can probably write that that's a very easy question. So आप अपने से इसको manage कर सकते हैं. I don't think there should have been a problem. Like the allocation of funds from the district regions to the establishment of the political setups in India, from villages to Zilla Parishad to district head regions and then to the states and national level. So you can always apply these hierarchical principle in the transport principle, in the market principle, and in the administrative principle. So it is always applicable, right? Even in the present context. The only difference is the ratios that he mentioned, the value of K that Christoller mentioned, 3, 4 and 7, it may not be in the same ratio, right? The application may not be in the same ratio. The transport may not increase in the same ratio of 4, or market may not increase in the same ratio of 3, and administrative may not be in the same ratio of 7. But overall principle remains the same. It is applicable present date. There is a hierarchical order in the settlements. You can start from the village and take it to the district level, then take it to the state level and then national region. So that's the aspect. Question number 6 is again a contemporary aspect. It says development induced displacement poses serious challenge Mention its causes, consequences and solutions. Context बता रहा हूं मैं इसमें. Then you can manage. Development induced displacement. It is in relation to the tribal displacement, in relation to the displacement of population because of construction of dams, because of construction of the mining activities, because of other aspects. So development induced displacements include the displacements of tribes caused or the population caused by construction of dams, construction of or mining activities, and other development work also sometimes lead to some natural hazards, can lead to some disasters rather. At least there is a potential threat, especially in the case of mining activities, like of earthquakes and so on, and the population has to displace from the region. So challenges, the first and very important challenge is the resettlement, right? Especially tribals resettlement. So there's a special context when it comes to the tribal resettlement, because that is in the case of tribals or have a very strong regional affinity, right? Not only the culture is distinct, but also have a very strong regional affinity. Since there is a strong regional affinity of the tribes towards a particular region, right? Towards a particular region, the same regional aspect cannot be created anywhere else. So it's very difficult to settle tribes. I'm not discussing in terms of in context to India alone. It is also in terms of the Amazon tribes which got displaced. It is also in context to the Central African tribes, context to the tribes that lived in Chile, those red tribes that lived in Chile. Because of mining, they had to get displaced. Right? So this is one of some of the examples. We can give some examples of population that has got displaced. For example, the Amazon tribes. For example, the tribes of Chile had to get displaced, and other population also of the Chile as well, due to the mining activities there. Indian example also you can quote. So the causes we know, because there's submergence of land, there is decrease in the land capability. So causes general में हम लिख सकते हैं that the causes include submergence, the causes include decrease or decline in the soil fertility, right? Unhealthy conditions, and sometimes some disasters caused by such activities, like landslides can also happen because of mining activities and so on. Then consequences and solutions, आप लिख सकते हैं consequences में tribal displacement. This offers, now there is resentment. Consequences can be social, like long migrations, which is the push factor migrations. Political, like Naxalism is one of the examples, or threat to internal security, threats to internal security. Economic loss or economic consequence, that is loss of workforce, and also traditional knowledge. The traditional knowledge is also lost by the same. Traditional knowledge. This is socio-political and economic consequence. और फिर आप solutions दे सकते हैं that the Employment generation should be done. The local population should be taken in confidence. They should be resettled. First, the resettlement issues should be solved, and then development projects can be done. Apart from that, we should always seek a balance between the effect and the pollution, etc. These are some solutions that we can suggest here. All right, so let me go to the next aspect. Describe the role of accessibility and affordability of food security in developing world. So I don't think there should be a major problem in answering this, because food security, it's a part of your economic geography. Economic geography में हम इसको discuss करते हैं, and especially developing world, largely हम देखते हैं कि accessibility or affordability is a question because the cost of food is increasing, right? It is increasing. So you can add that point. To address this question, I'll just discuss this point. The role of accessibility and affordability, right, in food security of developing world. So what is accessibility? Accessibility is first of all associated with the production, right? Affordability is the purchasing power, right? If the production increases, the cost of food can decrease and it will be affordable for the developing world, like food security of the developing world. अब इसमें आपको थोड़ा challenges लिखना है. Challenges ये हैं कि food production and the population is increasing every year. So we have to feed a huge population. For example, we require, if we go by the food production, we require huge food production, nearly increasing the food production every year. India alone requires around 500 million tons of food. So we require gigatons of food, billion tons of foods. So 30 billion tons of food is required to feed the 7.8 billion population. And something like that we can mention. And more about, in developing world, you can write, because of the primitive agriculture practices, the agriculture production is also less. Agriculture production. So write about FAO, mention the program launched by food agriculture organizations, right? Then the next question is, environmental issues are not adequately addressed in regional planning. So here, make sure that what we have to understand is what are the different environmental issues associated with the regional planning. Environmental issues include issues related to increasing rate of pollution, soil degradation, then issues related to deforestation, issues related to increasing population problems or this submergence, right? Now the question comment hai, it is about comment. How do we comment this or on the environmental issues are not adequately addressed? Environmental issues are a part of regional planning. It is a part of regional planning. There is no doubt about it, right? So yes, there are environmental concerns related to the regional planning. We are going to write this way. Yet there are environmental issues related to the regional planning, which includes increasing rate of pollution, soil degradation, deforestation, etc. But the environmental aspect is always a part of our planning, is a part of regional planning, right? It's always a part of regional planning. For example, the watershed plans, watershed management planning, it is a regional planning. So it has not been compromised. The regional planning, environmental issues are not compromised because it focuses on afforestation. It focuses on soil conservation. So the element of environmental issues are there, लेकिन हम क्योंकि कमेंट पूछा इस क्वेश्चन पर, this statement पर, so we will go on a higher side, other side of this and say that no, environmental issues are adequately recognized or are addressed, although every regional planning when executed may lead to some environmental hazards or environmental issues. And what are these environmental issues? We can mention these. Okay, then it's a straightforward factual question. Question is, suggest criteria, indicator and technique of delimitation of formal regions. So first of all, एक definition है formal regions पर, which is based on a particular or a fixed criteria. Fixed criteria, it's the part of institutional area, institutionalized regions or instituted regions based on fixed criteria like criteria like per capita income, criteria like height, criteria like agricultural production, right? Criteria like climatic conditions, right? This is how formal region is defined. And to delineate, the question is, suggest criteria पर बाद में आएंगे, हम पहले देखेंगे what are the techniques used for delineation of formal regions. For the delineation of formal regions, there are single variable methods, right? Single variable methods where we take one variable and see, like suppose x is the variable and A is the region. So x variable of A minus x B, if it is less than a limit, then the region is 1. There's a same region, right? It's the same region. So based on the quantity, like where single variable like height, like agriculture production, right? It's considered. Besides that, there are multiple variable or other variable aspects like fixed indexed method, that is like per capita income is fixed and so on. There is also variable index method and cluster method. So जब भी आप regions पढ़ते हैं, you will find out this. What are the suggestions that you have? क्योंकि suggest criteria पर लिखा गया ना. So for suggestion, like see, already there are so many aspects that is considered in delineating the formal regions. What else should be considered? Maybe we can think of quantitative aspect. The quantifiable criteria can also be taken, right? Like population density and others. Then questions include, just a minute. Small number of mega cities are playing a key role in organization of global economics and culture. Explain. Small number of mega cities. Now, what about the global economics or organization of global economics and culture? Why this question? Mega cities are, like in the first point, you need to define this, right? The definition of a mega city. It is in terms of the population, growth of population and resource utilization, right? It's the largest city possible, right? Largest city possible. All resources are utilized to maintain that growth. उसको हम मेगा सिटी या मेगालोपोलिस सिटी कहेंगे. It says there are less number of cities that are playing key role in organization of global economics and culture. Why? Because three aspects: migration to megacities, and because of migration, there is huge amount of workforce that moves to the workforce in these cities, in the mega cities. And with the more workforce, there is a higher investment in these mega cities, right? Investment in mega cities. So this is how organization of global economics is actually playing a key role, because these are fewer cities in which the population is moving. They're becoming their agglomeration regions, right? Agglomerated regions. And culture as well, because see, it leads to the multicultural regions, multicultural and cultural diversity in megacities. There's huge amount of cultural diversity that is seen in these bigger cities, in these mega cities. Sometimes there is a friction also that is observed, right, in these cities because of cultural dilution. So एक तरफ हम लिखेंगे the economic aspect of it, because there's huge amount of workforce, infrastructure, investment, agglomeration of industries. दूसरी तरफ, like when we talk about the cultural aspect, it's multicultural, cosmopolitan culture, right? And cultural assimilations sometimes can also lead to cultural conflicts. Like towards the conclusion, we can write that cultural conflicts should be reduced. It can lead to cultural conflicts as well. Then question is like, why is radicalism seen as a paradigm shift in geography? Explain its causes, approach and criticism. Radicalism, देखो दूसरा क्वेश्चन है जो मार्क्सिस्ट ज्योग्राफी पर दिया गया है, radicalism. So we'll write in this way. First of all, in definition of radicalism: the growth of radicalism, right, development radicalism as a response to positivistic approach, and to QR, that is quantitative revolution, right? This was the cause of the growth. What is the approach? The difference between the radicalism and other aspect of welfare geography or other parts of geography is that it seeks change. So radicalism is more like aggressive aspect of social change. So it seeks the change, it advocates the change in the given social setup or given social structure. Writings like Antipode, you need to mention, of Richard Peat. The rise of radicalism took place because of rise in humanistic approach in geography. Humanistic approach in geography. And it is because, now why is it called, why is it called as a paradigm shift in geography? It is because there was a new approach, that is humanistic approach in geography, that was introduced by radicalism. And why is it so important? Because it seeks the change in the social order. It seeks the change in the political order. ये वो approach है जिसने change की तरफ, like it advocated the change. And it is due to the same geography, it is due to this radicalism, right? The welfare geography got its base. So it was not just theoretical aspect, but also played a very important role in the application of it. And it is due to this radicalism which developed as a parallel approach to QR, right? It developed as a parallel approach to QR, quantitative revolution, seeking the change in the social order and so on. So, developed as a parallel approach, and it is due to the same that talks like Stockholm Conference, or you can write in a way that environmentalism found its base along with welfare geography. इसलिए पैराडाइम शिफ्ट था. अभी तक पॉजिटिविस्टिक अप्रोच था, क्वांटिटेटिव रेवोल्यूशन था. Everyone was saying that to every cause there's a similar cause, there's a similar effect. But radicalism says that if it is the case, then why, despite having the similar climatic conditions of tropical in nature in Africa and Australia, why these are not at the same level of development? Why, despite of continents having the same condition, exactly the same condition, do not have the same level of development? It has got something to do with the historical aspect. It is something to do with the social setup. It is something to do with the political setup as well, which needs to change. And this branch of geography is also advocating change. That is the equitable distribution of resources must happen. और यही growth किया फिर. I mean, this was a case, this was a very strong approach of Marxist geography, which laid the foundations for humanistic approach, welfare geography, and later environmentalism. Aging population has adverse socio and economic consequences explained with examples. So, geriatrics was already asked in your in UPSC exams, and it's a case of geriatrics again, that aging population has an adverse social and economic consequences. पहले हम शुरू करते social consequences पर, because the question is structured, answer में अपने आप structure आएगा. First of all, social security. Because you see the number of old age population, old age houses or old age homes increasing. Right? This is social security. Health issues. And because of the health issues, the cost of health, or these health services getting costlier in developed countries. Example of this is Italy, where the average age is increasing, has increased. In fact, it is increasing, and there's a higher aging population. Example is Japan, which is facing this huge problem of aging population. Right? Isolation is third social consequence of aging population. Right? Isolation. Economic aspect, dependency ratio is higher. Dependency ratio, like Japan has a dependency ratio of 28%, right, because of old age population, only. And Italy has a dependency ratio of around 25% due to old age population, not among the young age, now not the child population, because of the old age population. So it's a very high percentage of dependency. Economic aspect, lack of demand. For example, European markets, right? They are saturated markets. right? Lack of demand. So these are socio-economic consequences of aging population. Also, not just lack of demand, but also lack of workforce. Economic aspect, economy is held by demand and supply. It's the population that creates demand. It is the population that works as a labor, right, as a workforce. So on demand and supply on both ends, it's the population. But if the population is aging, so it cannot act as a major workforce. At the same time, it cannot generate a huge demand. And that is where Europe and not Japan so much, because it also has a higher population density and accessibility to the markets of India and China or Southeast Asia. But Europe is facing this problem. There's a saturated market of Europe, and therefore the cost of production is very high. So this is what are the economic problems or socio-economic aspects of that is seen in the European aspect. In the European case especially, because of old age population. And old age per questions aata rahega future mein bhi. We expect the question on old age populations because it's one of the major problem related to the population, especially in the developed world. Last question. Present a critical account of Alfred Weber's theory of industrial location. Again, I would consider that an easy question because ये कुछ questions है जो हम बहुत expect करते हैं, like in your for your exams, and we study this industrial location model. One of the main aspect. So, to handle this question, just mention little bit about Alfred Weber's theory on industrial location, which was the rationalizing distance for profit maximization. Profit maximization so as to reduce the transportation cost. It was based on the principle of low input cost or reducing the input cost. And input cost is transportation, labor, and raw material. Agglomeration effect. So, first, one of the major critique of the Alfred Weber's model, he overemphasized on the least cost principle. Least cost principle. Right? ये सबसे बड़ा problem था. Did not pay attention to the maximum revenue generation because profit maximization can also take place because of maximum revenue. But he focuses only on the least cost principle. Then some other aspects of this model that you can always refer, that the emphasis when we talk about raw material, he gives the description of raw material as both are weight losing and both are weight gaining. So two raw materials may not have the same behavior or same idea, right? So it is not that both raw materials can be weight losing or weight gaining. As he mentioned, it's two raw material and one market principle. In his two raw material and one market principle, weight losing, either the raw material can be weight losing or weight gaining, fine, but the two raw materials cannot behave the same. That was his assumption. Then you can easily criticize other assumptions like man is not a rational man, is not economically rational. Man cannot always take economically rational decisions. Then we can also criticize based on the assumption like isotropic, isolated surfaces. Right? This is like do not exist. It's a hypothetical concept. Plus demand cannot remain constant. Demand cannot remain constant. ऐसा कुछ hypothesis है. But towards the end, जब आप इसको like criticize करेंगे, towards the end, you must mention its applicability. Despite of its problems, it is still applicable, like its application in setting up of steel plants across the world. Steel plants are located in the vicinity of raw material and a major port that ensures transportation. Least cost principle, it is still applicable. But yet, because the criticism is on the basis of the overemphasis. Right? This was the last point that we can discuss. And right, that's a maximum time that we can take. Anyways. So I hope you got some input, some insights, especially those who have taken mains this year. I wish them all the very best. Hope you come with flying colors. Your results are positive and you get through this mains exam and get through the cycle of this exam as soon as possible and in this attempt only. For those who have not taken mains yet, who have not taken their attempts yet, this is the UPSC exam and it will judge your performance, your analysis, your deep thinking, your motivation level. It will judge every aspect of your personalities through such questions. So prepare well, do well. I'll see you in some other discussions. Thank you. And once again, I wish you very good luck for your exam, and those who have taken mains 2021 with any optional, not just geography, any optional, I wish all the best and hope to see you in interview sessions soon. Thank you.